the way I feel about nature is, to me, like life is like this planet and everything on the planet is like Eden to me. I know that's maybe strange to some people, but to me it's like that. It's like all the animals and the birds and the plants and the water itself. Like the water itself is the one thing that always connects me to everything. Like the rivers. And to me, like the rivers of Eden, talk about in the Bible, like to me the Wood River in Rhode Island is like a very special place. But so is the Delaware River and other rivers that I've fished in my life. They're all kind of the same, even the ones on the West Coast. They bring me into a place inside of myself where I feel totally at one with nature, and it just keeps on opening up. Like I'll look across the river and I'll see a little hole over there, or a little dark spot, and I'll look at it, and I'll feel it. And sometimes I know that there's an animal that lives in that hole, and sometimes it's just a hole. But I will somehow or other sense what's going on, and I do the same with the water. I look at the water, and kind of feel in my feelings where the fish are. I use my mind, and I use all kinds of things like that also. But it's mostly, to me, it's kind of like a love affair with nature, and I really do love. I do love the river, and I do love the fish. I love the mayflies, and I love the stoneflies, and even the little crayfish. All of it means something to me. I feel so blessed that I have that feeling for nature. The birds. I love dragonflies. I love watching dragonflies. To me, they're amazing. I even have favorite species of dragonflies that I watch. They come out at different times of the year, just like the mayfly. They have territories. They defend their territories from each other. And they fight, and then they go back to their little space. They're like little boxers. And the more and more I look at nature, well, I've been looking at it this way since I was a little boy. I realize that children really have the best view of nature, because they just see everything that happens. Like they'll see a butterfly, they'll see a bird land, they'll see a worm, and they'll come right up to, like if they see a butterfly, they'll put their nose right up to it, look at it, and their eyes get crossed. Of course, the butterfly will fly away. They'll be surprised when it does. But that kind of attitude is the attitude that I've taken with me my whole life. And it's been with me like when I've been fishing for giant tuna and marlin, steelhead and striped bass, trout, and all kinds of stuff. My whole life, you know. My dad was like that too, but he didn't talk about it. And we would go out at the boat. I had a very remarkable father. He was very much a loner, but I loved to go fishing, and I loved being with him. I loved being with him more than anything else. And he would take me out fishing, but not like they do, not like normal people. Like we would go out at night. I was like 5 and 6 years old, and we'd sail out into Narragansett Bay. I say sail out, but that's what we did. But we had a motor, and we'd go to some place he wanted to fish, and he'd anchor up, and we'd fish all night long, you know, and catch striped bass. Sometimes we'd catch one, sometimes we wouldn't catch any. But oftentimes we'd catch 5 or 6. But in those days, that was really good, the way that we fished. We fished kind of in a primitive way. But it was wonderful. And then the sun would come up, and all the sounds would be there. And he would tell me stories, and I would listen to his stories, and I'd ask him questions. And I spent years doing that, from my whole childhood, up until I was a teenager. That was like a big part of my life. It was always, not always at night, but we spent a lot of whole nights out there. Like sometimes we'd go out, we wouldn't come back for 2 or 3 days. We'd stop at Prudence Island and get some food in a little, what do they call it? It was like a convenience store, but in those days they weren't called convenience stores. And I'd sit in the boat, he'd go to the store and come back with some food. And then we'd take off and go try to catch some bluefish or night we would fish somewhere else. And then the next day we'd go back to Barrington, which is where we lived. And we had a boat. And we had a boat slip, and we didn't have any problems. It was a different world, you know. But that's the world that I carry inside of me. And it's a lot of freedom. I was raised with a lot of freedom. And I still carry it. That's one of the things I do with people when I show them things, like when I did the Tuesday nights thing, just showing them how they could be free and how to move around, how to avoid people's property, and how to be able to do what you wanted to do. And that's what I know. I know that world, the world of moving around and how to get out of a parking lot. I was thinking about rivers. I was thinking about this river over in Connecticut. I was over there with a lady. She's a nice lady. She was a daughter of one of my mother's friends. And we were sitting by the side of the river. And I was telling her about rivers. And she was interested in what I was saying. And said, you know, rivers, they have a rhythm to them, you know. The water that comes down, it makes certain sounds. And then it's depending on what the weather's been like. You know, if there's been raining upstream, all of a sudden the river will change its sound. And you can tell what the river's doing by the sounds that it makes. Kind of like when you're along a rocky beach when the waves come in and all the stones make those little clicky sounds. And then when the wave goes out, it makes a whole bunch of sounds. And it keeps on going hiss and hiss. And it changes and changes. And then if you we're in traffic, like in New York City, the cars would make a lot of noise, but if you're on a country road, they just make a little bit of noise. But rivers are like that. They change their sounds. I was telling her about it that day. We were sitting at a little bench, like a picnic bench next to the river. And I could hear the river starting to change its sound. And I said, listen. So she started to listen. And the sound, it increased. You know, you could tell that there was more water coming down. And it got pretty high. And the river actually rose about 2 inches while we were sitting there watching. And then I said, now listen. And then the river started to go down. And it went down a couple of inches. This is over the course of about 2.5 hours. And you would never notice that, but there's an actual wave in a river. And you pay attention to those things, and they can actually help you catch fish. I'm not saying they're the only things that are necessary, but if you notice those things, like you know when the water's coming up, you know when the water's going down, and like when that water's going down, or when that water's coming up, fish will turn on and start feeding when the water's starting to rise. And then they'll also turn on and start to feed when the water starts to drop, but they'll be in different places. They will move when it's starting to drop. Those things are like absolutely invisible to almost very, very few anglers pay any attention to that kind of stuff. But I love paying attention to that stuff. And it just makes everything so much more intense and so much more beautiful.